Are you looking for a new opening to play with black? If so, stick around, and by the end of this video, you'll know one of the very, very best systems in the game of chess. Now, we're going to go ahead and take a look at this little system we've got here. It is known as the Modern Defense, and the neat thing about it is you can basically play it against any first move that white may put out there. E4, D4, C4, F4, Knight F3, you name it, you can play it. So we're going to start with, we're primarily going to look at E4 here because that is basically the most useful for this. Now the first thing you want to do is play G6, and now here I've highlighted a few moves here: Knight F3, Bishop C4, Knight C3. Some people will choose to play it that way, and let's say for example they do. What we want to do is we go Bishop G7. That is always going to be our second move here, and we'll say they go Bishop C4, and now we play D6. If they basically play as basically as they can, and they play it as if they are playing the Italian game, say they castle here, we go Knight F6, castle next turn, we're totally fine, very easy to play. Their position, they're not really playing for a whole lot. You're going to get to put in all of your normal modern system moves, but we'll dive further into that later on. Let me go back to move 1 here. So our first move in the Modern Defense is always G6, immediately followed by Bishop G7, and then D6, and then so on and so forth. That is how you start the Modern Defense. Predominantly here, white's going to play D4. Granted, some people, like we just saw, will play Knight F3, and they'll play other moves, but basically they'll either play Knight F3 in the basic Bishop C4 castle scenario, or they'll play moves like Knight F3 and eventually play D4 so it transposes. So D4, we play Bishop G7, right? Now, there are a number of things they could do here, which we're going to take a look at all of the common enough ones that warrant us looking at them. Let's start with the most common of them all, Knight F3. All right, as I previously stated, our third move in this system is D6, so we are fighting for a little bit of control over E5. A part of it also is we would like to play Knight F6, but we want to time it properly. If we were to play Knight F6 at this moment, we have to worry about E5, and then we choose which square to put our knight on. If we go to E4, they go Bishop D3 and attack it. If we go to D5, they may just play C4 and attack that way, and it's not going to be overly pleasant. Not to mention, after the knight moves, our bishop is staring down this two pawns right here connected, and it's not going to be pretty for the bishop either. So we like to throw in D6 before we play Knight F6. Now, if we go by common moves here, we're going to say Knight C3, just the standard 2 knights variation of the Modern Defense. Now we get to play Knight F6, and us playing D6 earlier does make a difference. You know, if they were to play E5 here, which is not impossible, it's technically playable, just not advisable. What you want to do is you take, that's why you put the pawn there, and then how are they going to take back? If they recapture with their pawn, you're going to trade queens, and the position's going to be fine for you. So we'll look at that. You trade queens, chances are they aren't going to go king takes, they're going to go knight takes. Now you throw in Knight G4, they got a problem on E5, and they're going to be trying to defend it. Knight C6 comes after that, and you're just developing all of your pieces, doing your best. Now I'll go back just a little bit. When you capture the pawn, realistically they ought to capture back with their knight. And here you do want to challenge that. You want to bring this knight over to D7 and attack. Ideally, if they let you capture, you probably should. If they capture you, well, you just got rid of a knight in the center, so that can't be a bad thing. You simply capture it back, you get castled, it's a good position, you're ahead in development. So it's not really anything to worry about it, that if they play E5, you take and the center clears out. Now, back to solid, good moves that you can expect to be seen here. After Knight F6, the common move for white is actually Bishop C4. So they're developing pieces and they have 2 pawns in the center. Pretty likable position for white, but also, if you look at it from white's point of view, what are they trying to do? There's not exactly a plan, it's just develop and have center control. We're going to have a plan soon enough, so we're going to castle. White usually will castle there as well. But the way they've played it is they've actually set us up for a common enough tactic in such positions. You've probably seen this idea before. You're welcome to pause the video if you'd like to figure out what I'm talking about, by the way. Now, I'm going to tell you the move. It is Knight takes E4. Now, it's a neat enough tactic. They're going to recapture. We're going to play D5. I want to put it out there. I'm not saying this is a game-winning tactic or anything. We don't even have a material advantage when all is said and done. However, continue putting in common moves. Bishop takes, queen takes. Yes, the material is still even. Now we have a target on D4. They have a knight that needs to be moved. Our queen is active in the center. Our rook is coming to D8. And there's tons of pressure on D4 for sure. And to take it further, Common move, very sensible, probably best to move knight c3. We put the queen on c4. So our argument is, what are they gonna do about it? Right? It's not like they can play b3 to kick the queen out. They drop a knight. They can't go knight d2. They drop a pawn. Knight e5, more plausible. I'll put that one on the board since it actually makes more sense by sight, but you're going to capture and then go knight c6, and now the new target is e5. So you just move on to that. Now we go back a little bit. On queen c4, there's no good way for them to kick the queen out. And again, d4 is a target. You know how quickly we're going rook d8 or knight c6, maybe c5 before knight c6. Maybe there's an e5 in here, a bishop g4 to pin the knight guarding the pawn. There's a lot of ways to put pressure in the center. So most people play bishop e3, very sensible choice to guard the pawn. We're going to play rook d8 anyway. All right, most people go queen e2, and you're just going to take that trade and go bishop g4, because now they have a problem here. If we take that knight, we double the pawns, and we have good prospects for the endgame. But they can't just stop you. They can't move the knight or they lose the other knight on e2. They're skewered there. And they can't really guard the knight, so they don't really have a choice. So most people play c3. Very nice, sensible move. Pawn chain to support their center. So you're just going to do what you threatened and take the knight. They take back. You develop. We'll say they put a rook on d1. You play e6. And it's not like this is just a dominant, clearly winning position, but you have an advantage here in that they have doubled pawns. And I would dare say your pieces are better. It's unclear what white is going to do from here. At least we can look at this and figure something out. We can play slow, maybe h6, g5 to take space there. We could be looking to relocate the knight, perhaps knight e7, knight d5, or knight f5. It's possible we start pushing pawns on the queen side. a6, b5, maybe we go up to a5, b4. There are possibilities, at least, for us to slowly grind this out. And they have the glaring weakness of doubled pawns, and later on they have the isolated pawn on h2. It's just not a good pawn structure. It's not the most flashy way to win, but if you were to pick a side here, nobody is going to pick to play white in this position. It's not a very appealing position to play out. That is what you want to do if we go all the way back to move 1, e4, g6, d4, bishop g7. If they play the most common continuation, bringing out both of the knights, that's the way you want to do it. However, there are plenty of other ways to look at too. For example, beyond knight f3 here, there's also f4. Now this one's not nearly as common, but it also does look a little bit scary, given that they have this little wall of pawns now in the center of the board. You got to be careful about that. You're going to play d6 anyway. And you'll have to take my word for that. If you plug this into an engine, d6 may or may not be among the top 5 moves that pop up, but it is the top theoretical move. This is a move you play just by theory. Now they play knight f3 here, and then there's some debate for what you should do next. I'm going to recommend you play c5. And it's a funny idea. So if they capture the pawn, it's no big deal. You get to go queen a5 check. They'll block the check, probably bishop. You capture with your queen. Point ends up being your bishop is an absolute beast on the diagonal, and your queen is active, and you have easy development. So white usually seeks to avoid that if they can help it. If they've seen this before, they know not to take. And chances are, if you're playing f4 and move 3, you probably have seen some stuff here. So what most people tend to do is they just guard with c3, and that's perfectly fine and decent. You're going to capture, and you're going to go bishop g4 and pin the knight. And so now your target is d4. You're going to go queen b6, you're looking at knight c6, you're going to take the knight at the right time. You're putting pressure on d4. Take it further. Most people, even masters, play bishop e2. Now you want to play queen b6. All right. You're immediately threatening to take and take in the center, winning a pawn. Now, if they try to stop that with, say, e5, as most people do, great, play knight c6. Again, you are threatening to take, and take, win a pawn, just like you would love to do. And here, most people actually castle. I was surprised when I noticed that. A lot of people just castle in that position, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense, considering you capture, they capture, you capture, you're up a pawn, plus you are threatening to just capture with a double check. So very pleasant position, I would say. Maybe you have some slight issues if they try pinning the knight, but you can always capture this with check, bare minimum, and then save your queen. So even that's not really a big deal. That's if they play f4 on move 3, so you don't have much to worry about there. What if they play bishop c4? Some people actually do that. There are some continuations here where if black decides to mess around and not play properly, white actually does get a pretty decent attack. However, we're just going to play d6. White predominantly plays knight f3. We play knight f6. They play knight c3, and suddenly we're transposing into the first line we looked at, where we castle, they castle, and we're back into this one, where we capture in the center, sacrificing the knight so that we lead into a fork. And we've already seen this position. It ends up leading us into a nice position where we get a lot of pressure on the d4 pawn. So we don't mind that at all. Which means, coming back here, bishop c4, knight f3, they kind of go hand in hand. You just play the same d6, knight f6 system. It all transposes if you go with those kingside piece development moves. It's going to lead into the same sort of scenarios. However, there are some people who will try to develop on the queen side with knight c3. Now, this can be very, very different. This is a far trickier line than all the others we've seen. So far, the lines we've seen have been fairly simple and not too worrisome. But this one, we're going to play d6 again. This one's a bit more spicy, shall we say. They're going to play bishop e3. We're going to play a6. This is a new move in these lines, but the point is you're going to go b5 pretty quickly. And long term, maybe you're putting the bishop on b7, knight in d7. You're expanding on the queen side because when people play this way with white, knight c3, bishop e3, it usually means they're following up with queen d2 pretty soon after castle and queen side. So we are playing in preparation for that. We play b5. Now here, most people will either castle queenside or play f3. It doesn't really matter which move they play between these two because they are the two next moves regardless, generally speaking. Nothing else really makes sense. We're going to say f3, so they have a mini pawn chain here. f3 supports e4. It also, later on, will support g4 when this pawn comes up the board, so that is the point of that move. Now we develop the knight to d7. A couple of different purposes in these lines. Sometimes that knight will hop this way to b6, and sometimes you play c5 in the hopes that they take and you get your knight to c5. It all just depends on how it plays out. For now, we're looking at what commonly happens, and commonly, white castles queenside here. And now we want to stick the bishop on b7. So we are getting some development done at least. Now we are not going to castle queenside ourselves, and we also are not going to castle kingside anytime soon. That would be, in most cases, signing up for a quick loss. So from here, white generally plays h4. Sometimes they'll play g4 first. h4 is considered the stronger move by many. I myself play this system with white a lot of the time. I choose h4 first. The idea, pretty quickly, it's not just that you're going to go g4, although I'll tell you this, if you let white get a chance to go g4, they will take it, which is why black ought to play h5 here. But the point also is now knight h3 is a thing, and that knight should be coming to g5, and it's just going to chill out there. It's going to be hanging out on that square, and you can't do much about it. Continuing further, black wants to play rook c8. You want your rook, generally, if they've castled queenside, you want your rook on the same file as their king. That's generally pretty helpful. I mean, imagine if this pawn and this knight disappeared, right? This is immediately looking very good. And that also kind of tells you what's coming next. You want to play c5 very quickly, now, especially now that the rook is on the c file. Very commonly here, white will play knight g5. Again, they just like that square. There's not even an immediate threat or anything, but you can't kick the knight out. Their knight is on our side of the board, and we can't do anything about it, right? Don't make the mistake of playing the very ugly f6. They're just going to go knight e6, and you lose your queen. So I would not be signing up for that scenario. No, thank you. Now, if you just really insist on getting rid of the knight, you could attack it with the bishop, but you don't really want to give up the bishop for that knight, especially when, ideally, you're going to go c5 here, and surprisingly enough, most people do just take. Granted, there aren't really any obvious secondary options. Some people may try pushing the pawn. I've tried pushing the pawn from white's point of view, and what tends to happen is black will very quickly go b4, white has to move the knight, and then a lot of the time this knight comes to e5 or the queen comes to a5, and it's like, it's so much easier for black to play it than it is for white, and it's just a mess because one more mistake from white seems to end the game. Quite appealing, and also a good reason why I stopped playing d5 in this position. Got rolled a few too many times. Instead, a lot of people just take the pawn, and then black has to capture with the knight. If you recapture any other way, it's not going to be very good. For example, if you tried capturing with the pawn, I don't think you're going to like how this plays out with some of the tactics. There's knight takes b5, and you take back, they go bishop takes, and you've got a problem on d7. You can try to hold that off with bishop c6 perhaps, but then captures, and we'll say that you captured with the rook. Queen d5, this is looking kind of gross. Forcing rook f6 to guard f7, you play e5, they have to go rook f5, and now it's just really, really unpleasant. In fact, I think they could even go e6 here, giving up the queen. Disgusting tactics in this position. But that is why white likes to play the castle queenside lines here, because it does lead into some disgusting and gross positions where it is very tactical and easy to throw the game away. So you could very well end up in positions like that. Now we'll go back a little bit. That's a bit extreme. I could not expect you to ever reach that position yourselves. Oh, we're going to go all the way back here. You'd rather not open up the d file. Case in point, you do not want to open up the d file and give them any play there. You want to go knight takes c5. Much, much better. And if you get them to go bishop takes knight, that would be very helpful. You just take with your rook, you got rid of the dark squared bishop, and you have a lot of pressure on the c3 knight. So that's very much a good thing. However, if anyone has played well enough to get into this position for white, they probably know a very normal move when you castle queenside is to play king b1. So let's say they go king b1. Now, if you want to continue your attacking chances with black, you play queen a5. Your bishop is still on this diagonal. Now your queen is coming out this way. You still have your knight here. Your rook is on the c file. You can see your pieces are coming into place. And if white doesn't play accurately, it could get rough. It could get very rough very fast. So that is the appeal in this position. In fact, if white doesn't find bishop d4, the position is supposed to already be better for black. Now, I'm not aware what the most common move is. I will tell you I've had this position with white, and I've definitely failed to find bishop d4 in the past. So I don't know what moves I have tried. I have a feeling I've probably made some bad choices offering I know I've tried knight e2 here, for example, and then they traded queens. And this looked like it was going to be totally fine because, in theory, black's attack is over. But also, if black just starts playing normal with a move like knight f6, can you really look at this and not agree that black's pieces are better? I mean, black is ahead in development, and white doesn't really have much to play for. And now black could even castle soon, too. Now, the attack is over, but the positional play is a lot stronger for black than it is for white. I would not recommend this for white. I will show you what it looks like if they find the proper bishop d4 move, though. I don't think you generally want to take that trade. You'd rather keep the bishops and go knight f6. And if they made it this far with all the accurate play, then you are playing a very strong opponent. We have to accept that. But also at the same time, we are about 14 moves into the position, and you've got all your pieces out. White's castle queenside, and you've got your pieces on the queen side ready to attack. You're putting yourself in position for if white makes one wrong move suddenly, and that is the appeal in the modern defense, especially if they castle queenside. You get a lot of games that are very sharp and double-edged, and that's generally a good thing when you're playing with black, because you start out wanting to equalize, and then it can be hard to find a way to push for the win. Well, you get that with the modern defense plenty of times, whether it's with a slower method like we saw with the first few lines, or if it's like this, where you have a very sharp position. At the end of the day, if your opponent plays all the right moves, there's no shame in it being a drawn game, If they play perfect chess, what more can you do, right? In any case, congratulations on learning the basics of the modern defense here. I hope it will serve you well. If you're interested in learning how to punish the Italian game, by the way, then click the video that is appearing somewhere here on the screen. Thank you very much for watching. I will see you all in the next video.